Okay.
Okay, so we're now recording. It is, I'm in London, so I don't know what time. It's 1:04 p.m. in Pacific time. And today is Wednesday, July 18th. This is the steering committee. And so everything will be recorded and posted. So be careful about what you say. If there are some topics that you want to cover privately, you can go ahead and Slack me and I'll keep an eye on that. And we can stop the recording and cover that stuff. But I don't think anybody has anything specifically that I heard of. So Aaron, welcome back. You're going to be bosun?
Yes.
At least Ryan heard the cats here?
Yes, it's good to be back. I'm still catching up on all the things. I'm not sure which is more disorienting, starting at Google or coming back to the Kubernetes community after 8 weeks of not seeing what's happening. It's literal insanity. So I appreciated Chase's efforts at putting together a project board for us, and I thought we could try using that to just quickly scroll through what's in the in progress column to see if it actually belongs there. And that will get us to discussion about the charters because there's an issue about charters in there. Does that sound good to everybody?
Before we do that, can we give a brief update from the feedback Phil, Derek, and I had, which fed into the charters?
Can we do that when we get to the charters?
It's like pre-charter conversation though, so I'm fine with whatever.
Yeah, if you don't mind. I just want to try using the board to see if we can actually get a thing to drive us. So thank you, Joe, for posting the link. So first there is a new repo request for the contributor site. I guess I could share the screen here. No, actually, I have too many things on screen. So first request is for the contributor site. It's a request from Contribex. As far as I was concerned, their KEP looked great. They've met all the requirements except for a written record of the decision that the SIG has agreed to this repo. And so they are kindly doing a vote on their mailing list right now. Thank you for sharing your screen. They're doing a vote on their mailing list, and I figure once that vote closes, I'm happy to go ahead and create the site. Joe, I saw you had questions about the scope of it. I think that would be better directed at Contribex and on the KEP. But my read was they're just talking about shuffling markdown files around.
Yeah, I'm happy to engage with them. I think either way, if they think they need a repo around this stuff, we'll find the right way to make it work.
Yep.
There's no reason to stand on that.
Cool. Next item is something about documentation requirements. I'm not really sure where this came from based on my read of the agenda. It talks about determining how documentation policies are enforced and how the enforcement is folded into SIG release. It's unclear to me where the steering committee needs to weigh in and why this isn't something that SIG release purely has mandate over.
So I'm trying to remember the conversation. Was really one of as new features, as new things happen, do we want to make documentation be a gate to some degree, right? And so SIG docs can say, hey, you should do this. But if we want to say, hey, like, you know, you cannot check in a feature, you cannot merge this, you cannot flip a feature flag until your documentation is a certain level, that's a level of policy that probably should involve the steering committee making those decisions.
Okay, I hear that. That is a difficult thing to enforce because a lot of features are implemented as a variety of, as like a stream of pull requests. And so it's kind of difficult to yank them all back out.
No, it's more of a, when you switch it from on the major switches. So even though you could have all the pull requests in place before you can actually promote from alpha to beta, which is like a final, it's a final push really.
Okay. So
before you can do that final push between alpha to beta or beta GA, that there would be a gate.
Okay, that sounds like a SIG architecture decision. Where's the steering in this?
Policy.
Yeah, I think there's a proposal in the doc that SIG docs should propose what that gate should be for alpha, beta, and GA, and we should approve it or complain if we don't like it. Seems reasonable to me.
Yeah, I think the mechanism, which I'm a fan of that idea, I think it gating a flag, I was also thinking it'd be a stepping stone towards feature branches or something. Docs are just one requirement. I think we also need to look at tests So, if the release team worked with SIG release or with SIG docs and SIG testing and other parts of the org about the requirements, then it could be like a launch checklist. But yeah, you passed all the checks and you can launch. One challenge that we've had in the past with turning on things late is that the tests get run about 100 times more frequently when they're run at head in the master than if they're just feature tests that only get run when changes specific to that feature get pushed. So that's an issue with feature branches, but it's also, depending on how the enablement works, could be an issue with the gating approach as well. We need to make sure that the tests run often enough to surface problems early.
Is this really in progress, or have we kind of punted on this? So our goal was to evaluate what's actually in progress, or is this kind of like, do we have a new column that's, it says blocked and waiting. So we're waiting for documentation to write the policy thing?
Yeah, I'm with Tim. I think we need to find an owner for this. It's probably not somebody on the steering committee. And then it's just, I think it's a matter of the steering committee to be able to advise and approve, or maybe punt it to SIG architecture. I think that may be a reasonable thing also.
Yeah, again, my principal concern here is like, I'm not clear on why steering committee has to be involved. This seems thoroughly something that, if we're trying to do our jobs right, we're trying to delegate decisions as much as possible. And
it's policy across SIGs, though.
It's up to us to decide which SIG is responsible. Like, I could imagine if SIG release had the right people, that it could be SIG release to define release requirements.
In the same vein as features aren't allowed to go to GA until they have conformance tests. I believe that was an architecture exclusive decision. And I would say it could be the same thing for features shouldn't go to GA, or flags shouldn't be flipped until SIG architecture has a say on that sort of thing.
Well, SIG, yeah, I mean, I could see that argument. And the API thing was pretty obvious where it fell, because SIG architecture owns API governance, which owns the definition of what a GA or API even means. And they own the conformance definition. So, and they own kind of all relevant sides of that particular issue.
So I don't know, I agree with we should find an owner, but to me it seems like this isn't something the steering committee is working on. We should see who from SIG docs would like to make this proposal and circulate it through SIG architecture and or SIG release. And if there are points of contention and they feel the need to escalate back up to steering, then we'll be happy to take a look at it. But if both SIGs involved agree, great. And there are members from the steering committee who are involved in both of those.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay, cool.
So to summarize, I put it to blocked and waiting, and we should update the note inside the documentation requirements one to punt it to docs folks to move on.
Sounds great.
Who's in charge of punting it back to who's going to write the email? It's got to be one of us.
Or I could ask Chase to do it.
Assign it to me, because I can go tap Chase on the shoulder.
Oh, or that would be good.
Here, I can even /assign. I'll do that. Okay, so now we're at the charters issue. Tim, you said you had some stuff you wanted to discuss before we even dove into specifics.
Yes, Phil's on the call. So Phil, Derek, and I went off and reviewed a number of charters, and Phil had updated the template. So it's more of a PSA, and that template reflects a lot of the commonality that we saw across the best practices and the things we didn't like. And the canonical examples that folks should reference, according to what we saw, was Node and auth were the examples, the good examples to try to replicate. So it's more of a PSA as we review. We should be taking a look at those two and taking a look at the updated template. Anything else, Phil, that I missed?
Nope, that's it.
Yeah, I had the action item after that meeting, though, to go and update Node to reference the common template. I haven't done that yet. I'll look to get that done shortly, but I don't know if we want to say what we liked or didn't like about them, but I think it was largely around declarations of scope and anascope.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's in fact what we were focusing on, like the nuance around specific roles, I think, is something that we wanted to downplay as what we're focusing on in the reviews. And come back to that as we iterate on and refine those.
Yep.
I created an issue for like just listing out things that make up a good charter and not so, well, just good, and I'll have a negative one. But that issue's out there. I don't know if we want to collaborate on that as we go forward. I know y'all have a doc separately that you list out like specifics in for each SIGs charter, but do we want to do something generic in that issue and then make a document? And that would actually help us as steering committee members review charters going forward. Phil, Tim, Derek.
Is that the meta issue or?
No, I'll give you a link to it. Let's see.
She's 31.
Okay. Yeah, just sent you a link.
Okay, thanks.
So, and what were you asking again, Michelle?
Yeah, I just want to know, like, how are we gonna talk about what makes a good charter? Where do we list out like the bullet points, basically? So like a good charter is going to look like the SIG charter template. It has a well-defined scope section that accurately reflects what the SIG is doing currently. There's a process for role transitions. Are there other things that we want to add to that item and make that maybe a document that's listed so that people understand like what we're looking for in a charter?
Well, so we have the short template and a document about the requirements for the charter. Should it just be a list in the requirements document?
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Like things that are especially important or things that are discouraged or at least not recommended or things like that.
Okay.
Like don't do it this way because you'll run into this problem or it's redundant with this other thing or the information should go somewhere else instead. That seems like it should go in the meta document, and then the template should just be a simple.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think I'm probably coming from Michelle's context as well. First off, sorry, I haven't reviewed any of the charters that have been assigned to me. I'm not even sure which ones there are. I would like to make that my focus and go heads down and focus on nothing but that soon. And what would help me do that is a checklist to know exactly what I should be looking for when I'm reviewing. So Michelle's issue looks a lot like what I would be expecting. If there are other documents there, maybe I just haven't read them yet. But so this could be an issue of me not being up to speed, and you all already have a checklist in your head. But I'm trying to I'm really hoping that like
what we were supposed to do, what I think Phil and Tim just did, which is we were supposed to look across like a half dozen or so charters, figure out what we liked and what we didn't like by looking at those examples, update the template and potentially the guidance document that goes along with it, and then go apply that to the remaining charters.
Yeah,
right?
So we looked at 4, and I think we looked at SIG-ARC, we looked at Node, Auth, and apps, and frankly, I think we felt ARC was not representative of like other SIGs necessarily.
It's also not done, so yeah, don't look at that one. That's on the back burner for now.
Can you, for my benefit, post the doc where you summarize that stuff in chat or something? I must have totally missed it right now.
I think there's a list in the issue that's linked off of the.
And the primary piece of feedback, like you can knit on a lot of things, but I think the biggest general knit was like some SIGs, the scope was so broad that they could literally accept any project into the project. They could literally sponsor any sub-project.
Well, I know the template didn't initially even have a scope section in there. And some of the charters that pre-existed the whole push to get to develop charters, were pretty short. Like there were 1-sentence scope descriptions, which is not sufficient.
So I think that was the major piece of feedback, and that those that had an out-of-scope section were helpful, and having the scope more closely aligned to the code that the SIG already owned or sponsored versus like aspirationally owned and sponsored was considered helpful, I think.
Yeah, I think that we do need to just push everyone to use the new template, because I saw a lot of rat holing. I forget which SIG it was. I think it was service catalog on like cleaning up the language of the old template. Like all of yesterday, there's 3 people trying to make the old template better. I think we just need to all decide whether this template here is good enough and tell everyone to start using it. It's just we're burning too many cycles.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Yeah, unfortunately, the SIGs got ahead of when we weren't really ready to move forward.
So we expect that by everybody using the template, they're all going to more or less use the same roles in decision-making process, and where we expect it to differ is in scope.
Yeah, so I think they'll link to the standard roles and then say where they deviate.
Yeah. Essentially, they can override, but just because all of them were spending all this time trying to like clean up the language, like, oh, what happens if somebody works for a new company or whatever? Like, they're just spending all this time.
So to me, it seems like we're taking a desperate like first pass at this because it's been way too long and it's probably not going to be right. So I'm wondering, are we making it, do we need to make it clear in documentation, policy, or process that this is intended to be iterative? So for example, one of the most important things we as a steering committee did for our charter was to make sure we had a process to like change our charter, right? Do we expect or anticipate such things from SIGs?
Yes, it's just a pull request away, right?
Well, I think there's a question of what deserves steering committee review versus just can be reviewed within the SIG, maybe. And I don't know what the volume of changes will be, and whether it will just glance at them all and say, yeah, it looks fine. This is not something the steering committee cares about. Hopefully that's the case. There aren't super frequent changes, but I think we should make it clear at least that if they change the scope of the SIG, the steering committee has to review that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think even the changing of officers has historically led to some confusion stroke, what's the right word? Controversy. We've had a few of them. We've had a few very smooth ones which were not problematic, and we've had a few more problematic ones. It seems useful to just mandate that they distribute the plans, 2 weeks before committing the pull request or whatever, just so that everybody's aware of what's going on and can complain if there are any objections.
Like, I don't know, to me, I'm wondering if this is a process that we owe it to SIGs to document. So we've haphazardly attempted to take a first pass here, but then going forward, as you change your charter, you need to do X, Y, and Z. Make sure you get lazy consensus from your SIG, and make sure you get sign off from a member of the steering committee.
Well, I don't, yeah, I agree that the steering committee should define a process so that not everybody needs to struggle to figure out one themselves. I don't know that that's the process that I would recommend, but I do agree that coming up with some kind of at least basic process would be helpful to people.
Like for me, even before I get the verbiage right, can I understand if, because it's totally trying to set the expectation that, hey, everybody, I know some of you feel like you've put a lot of effort into this and now it is set in stone forever and will not change. And it could be that, as humans often do, we've made a mistake the first time and there will need to be some readjustment. And I
don't think there's anything in the project or anything that we've done that implies that things are arbitrarily set in stone. I think if I recall correctly, the template spells out, changes to the template itself or changes to your charter. So it's not, we don't have an explicit, here are the bylaws for the template or something like that. But I think we could probably add some language to that, to the template that basically says, changes welcome over time, or some generic statement that makes it clear as they copy the template that they can just go forth and iterate on it as needed. But the whole purpose of the modification of the template was because we saw people redefining basically the same roles over and over again. And so we just decided to say, that's meta. Now just change the things that are different about your SIG.
Yes, I understand that. I guess like one devil's advocate corner case could be if the steering committee decides to make a change to that template, suddenly that changes the behavior of every single SIG that's linking to that template.
We could version it like the code of conduct.
But I think
That's what I was going to say, like point to a SHA and you're done.
Well, I don't even think we necessarily want to do that, right? Like if we're closing loopholes in this thing, like don't we want everyone to opt into that?
We can email all the SIGs and say, you know, please take a look at the changes, and if you're good, update to the new one. If you're not good, tell us why.
Or it's like, hey, you have 7 days to object. If you don't object, we're just going to like, you know, like.
I prefer the latter.
And I think the
there's GDPR on
into changes to the base.
Okay.
I think we should make a generic statement like this thing is subject to change over time and will be communicated via something, right? So that way, at least it's clear that we don't know the future. That's impossible.
That's the second line of the document.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sure, as needed. I'm just
okay. We can refine.
If we're cool with that language, right? It's just a tonal thing. That's all. I'm personally fine with that.
If anyone wants to update that to say we'll communicate over such and such a channel, I'd be totally okay.
So the other direction that makes me think about this question is when I look at, and I hope I don't rat hole us into another thing, but like when I look at SIG cloud provider and then all of these other SIGs for individual clouds, or that's really the only concrete case I have right now for where SIGs might want to merge, and we might have an opinion that differs from the opinion of the SIGs. And that opinion may change over time. I'm curious what the policy or process would look like for that.
I think the charters is a forcing function for scope bounding what a SIG is responsible for and whether or not it's a sub-project, right? Like we might need to change. I think the whole purpose of this is to try to rationalize the structure that we currently have, right? So, or the implicit structure, make it very explicit, right? Take what is kind of implicit and then rationalize it and make it very explicit. And
right. And so like a bunch of each of us are all looking at a bunch of different charters, and there's no one person who collectively understands the scope of everything and how it like links together and ties together and whatnot. That will take time. And if we notice that something is off over time, are we clear on how we're going to address that?
Do we want to have a subgroup of people responsible for maintaining, managing, looking at this as they're inbound? Because we've kind of federated the overall view of the world, but some subgroup of folks who look at all of the deets.
So I don't think, I mean, the charter should be succinct enough that we can actually pull together one page that actually pulls out the charters, the scope out of each of the charters, and that ends up, I mean, because that's the critical thing looking for overlap.
At least the mission statements are in the 6.yaml already.
Yeah, so maybe we just say, hey, that has to be the scope, that has to line up with the charter, and then we'll have a way to sort of overview and look for overlap and look for overly broad stuff and all that.
So Michelle's suggestion is, opening an issue and discussing this as we notice it over time. That's what I would expect to be the most obvious and intuitive direction take. I just wonder from a who has the final say perspective.
I think that is steering, right? That is why we're here.
Yeah, the way the steering committee charter is written, it's written to reserve all the power to the steering committee and delegate it.
Okay.
As for how to deal with the cloud provider and the SIGs for each cloud, yeah, I think we should maybe make that an issue since that's something that we want to talk about and then discuss it over time. Because I've been, I've reviewed that. I've reviewed the few email threads that we've had on that, and this conversation seems to just like rabbit hole on email thread, and it's just like not the right place to discuss it. So maybe we should track an issue and have a conversation later.
I think so for the charters, I think we kind of doled them out to members of the steering committee to make sure that each SIG had a kind of a mentor with respect to figuring out their charter. And maybe we should expand that to like a general mentoring role where someone on the SIG, so every SIG has allocated to it a steering committee member whose responsibility it is to make sure that that SIG is kind of functional and not overlapping with other SIGs and whatever, and advise them. They don't have to, actually attend all the SIG meetings, but maybe a quarterly check-in to say, is your SIG operating according to what we expect SIGs to do? Did that make sense?
It did. Part of me is like, that sounds like a single point of failure, but at the same time, informally, that's happening for a lot of us, for a lot of SIGs already, and I would be curious which SIGs aren't covered formally or informally by us. And it's not that hard to add that information into SIGs.yaml or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Add a steering committee mentor to each SIG, and we're done.
I would maybe view it not so much mentor as point of contact or liaison.
Yeah, we can debate the name, but that person on the steering committee who's responsible for making sure that this SIG is healthy.
Yeah, for each SIG, we try to assign a primary and a secondary.
So basically, are we talking about taking that spreadsheet and turning that into something a little more formal? Okay. I can take an action item to turn that into a formal thing and contact people if there are gaps in that. The only other question is, there are multiple SIGs where a steering committee member is also actively involved in that SIG. Does that change? Should that be considered one of the person, or should we still be going with, like, the spreadsheet kind of made sure that the two people were not a member of the SIG?
I think this, if I remember correctly, the spreadsheet didn't enforce that. It enforced that one of the two was not an active, like the lead of the SIG. I think it might be going a little over the top to not allow any of the SIG participants to be the steering committee representative for the SIG, unless we, I mean.
Yeah, okay. I don't see the. I think when we discussed this originally, we actually felt it was an advantage for that person to be familiar with what the SIG did.
Okay.
Like in terms of helping them craft a charter and define scope and things like that.
Okay, so I'm gonna make sure there are at least 2 steering committee members for every SIG based on the spreadsheet. If there aren't, I will look for some, and I'll try to make sure at least one of them is on the SIG and one of them is not.
Introducible. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Okay, so back to charters. What are next steps here?
If we think we're good with the template, I think we can move forward with reviewing the other charters that are in flight according to the spreadsheet, and then we can identify which SIGs don't have charters and say where we think we're ready now for all the rest of the SIGs to create their charters.
Okay, so messaging that we would prefer charters that basically just link to the template. Yay for you, you get to write less. We care about scope. We may have questions about scope. If we do have questions about scope, where do we resolve these? Do we reach out? Do we resolve them on the PR, right?
I would try that first.
Okay. Okay, and we're going to look at everything that's in flight, and then we will start soliciting from people who haven't done anything in flight. So we could maybe say that by the next steering committee meeting, we'll be at this point where we are soliciting from things that are not in flight.
Well, I probably can't do anything.
I know a lot of us are busy.
So there are like pull requests that are just sitting there.
I talk about those as being in flight, right? So
okay, yeah.
I'm wondering if we can get to
the people that are not in flight. I like worry about making commitments about getting to the people that are not in flight, because like until we have the people who have been in flight for a long time resolved and done. So could we maybe just focus on that for now and then come back next steering committee meeting and then decide on whether we're ready or not for the next batch?
Okay.
So Yeah, we have 10. I think we should get them all merged. The people who are on the list, good with helping out. Like Brian Grant has 3 of the ones that have PRs up, but he doesn't have time. Can we maybe switch that up to people who have time?
That's fine. SIG architecture is not ready to move forward, so I would don't consider that one in flight for now.
Okay.
I can take apps. I'm pretty familiar with apps. Unless that seems like a conflict of interest or something.
I'm not worried about conflict of interest. I looked at apps and provided feedback before Matt said he addressed it, and Clayton and I didn't have time to get back to him. I think scope was the biggest issue there, because it seemed to be claiming a scope for a lot of things that weren't considered in scope for the Kubernetes project as a whole. So that was something that we wanted to resolve. There were also similar issues with trying to fix the template, but if it just updates to refer to the template, I think that aspect of it should be addressed.
So the 2 main motions here, just to be clear, I just want to make sure that I understand what we're talking about here. It's going to be encouraging these SIGs unless they have really good reasons. I think something like SIG Cloud may have reasons to structure things a little bit differently, for example. But unless they have really good reasons, just point to the main template as being sort of authoritative. And then making sure that there's a good scope that passes the sniff test, and then maybe we can socialize the scopes more widely across the steering committee as we look to settle this stuff. I mean, beyond that, I think and then just being a point of contact and explaining and creating some certainty around this. Is that what we're talking about here?
I think we're trying to just get the first 10 merged and using the template.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So it's getting the template and scope. Template plus scope is where we're at.
Right. So if there are areas where the specific reviewer has a question, is it the sort of question about the authenticity, scope, whatever, we're trusting them to decide it on their own, or at what point do they kick it up to the steering committee to check out? It's the sort of thing where I feel like you kind of trust your best judgment, and then when you reach a point where you're like, I'm not sure what precedent this sets, you email the steering list with a link to where you're at, and we can all jump in on that or whatever.
I don't think it's unreasonable for us to say, hey, I've been working with SIGAuth, because they don't have a scope right now, and that's the first one where I see my name as lead. I've been working with SIGAuth. They've decided to use the standard charter. Here is their scope. We think that this actually captures what they do. Anybody have any objections? If we let 3 days go by or something like that, then we'll just assume that this is good. I like some sort of lazy consensus where at least we socialize that with the steering committee seems like maybe a reasonable process here.
I'm getting we all seem to agree that the template's great, awesome. And I would like for us to socialize when we're noticing differences in scope or how we're making those decisions, in much the same way as we have discussed the concept of the Code of Conduct Committee having some sort of record of its decisions and how and why they were made. I think it's fair to do the same thing for adjusting scope. And I think that's totally fine to be public and on the steering mailing list.
That should be on the PR itself. Why would you not put a comment on the PR itself that says your scope is unbound at steering? We need to revise this scope. I don't see why that isn't part of the standard review process for the person who's assigned, who's doing the review for the PRs that are in flight, and then they can have the team or the group here to get broader buy-in. How is it different from any PR?
That's fine. I guess I was just instead of at steering, mailing the steering list, since that seems to be higher signal for folks. Unless your GitHub notifications are so useful that at steering is meaningful to you.
I have filters for filters that have filters. So everything that's steering gets bucketed properly. So
I don't live that life.
I am curious to know what those filters are. That sounds amazing.
I'm looking into Sieve to see if I can programmatically generate filters.
This is not something I'm proud of.
Oh, Brian, I did send an email where there's a tool where you can have a YAML file that specifies filters that then gets uploaded to Gmail automatically.
Oh my God.
I can dig that up for if you want it.
Yeah, I think I have pointers to a couple of those. I need to actually generate that YAML probably.
Well, actually what I did is I took my YAML based on Tim's suggestions, and that might be a good starting point. I sent that out to
I've already implemented all of Tim's. It's not adequate.
Or did we decide we're going to tag in that mailing list, or are we going to do?
So I would comments I would put in the PR in terms of raising visibility, emailing the mailing list. Hey, there's this major issue, we fix it here, or it's still being debated here. I think that's totally fair and useful, but I would put the full record of what's going on just in the PR.
All right, so we need to keep each other honest about sort of saying, hey, not the mailing list, do it in the PR, or not the mailing list, do it in the PR then?
I think the suggestion was both, right? Like, let's tag everyone and then also raise visibility in the mailing list.
Yeah, details in the PR, notifications via mail.
Okay.
Right. My hope is that the details and auditability of the decision are in the PR, but at the sort of summary level, FYI, this is something we're deciding on, or this is what we have decided. Like, think of it like we could give a quick 10-minute spiel next steering committee meeting about what we noticed. You were saying, Michelle?
I have a question. Yeah, I'm not really understanding the, hey, we're just going to point to the charter template thing, because the charter template is more of like a fill in the blank, choose your own adventure sort of thing. So I just want to make clear, like, what we're asking is what we need to do is go to the SIG leads mailing list and ask all of the SIG chairs to go back and redo their charter according to the charter template for it to be approved. Is that what we're asking? Phil and I are not for that, but I'm just curious.
So my problem is I see SIG service catalog yesterday spent all their time not focused on scope, but like adjusting language on how SIG chairs are selected based on language that we're not trying to keep up to date. And
that was all shifted to like, here's the meta topics, right? And if you diverge, that's what the template update was.
Right.
It's basically like to get rid of this redundant, weird text that keeps repeating. So that was changed in the template.
Brandon, could you maybe pull up the template that we're all talking about so that Michelle can see what we're talking about?
It really should be what you do, what you don't do, and how you deviate from the normal process that others get stuff done. And that's what this template basically has.
Yeah, so this is the template as it sits today. And then this is the template that a lot of people started with.
So they kind of copy pasted everything here, and we're suggesting that they instead link to the other one.
Right,
so
exactly.
It can be confusing because the other one still has like fill in the blanks here and here. It would be helpful if there was a template that linked to the template. You get what I'm saying, right?
For service catalog in particular, like their scope links to their definition, so it's not even like written in the charter. Is that okay? Like, that's something I was unsure about. Would you mind pulling the service
I would want the charter to be authoritative.
Right.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, so they link to their mission statement, essentially.
Okay, but the mission statement, we're saying it should be in the charter.
I don't think we have an opinion on anything called a mission statement officially, but like the scope of the SIG should be defined in the charter, and if that happens to align what they want to consider their mission, then that's fine. Or does SIGs.YAML have mission? It has like a
SIGs.YAML has mission. At least
it's called mission. Okay.
Such a fun word.
Sounds like we need import statements in our charters, so you can just import stuff from the template.
Right. Like I think the suggestion isn't that we ask people to like rewrite their template with a whole new set of copy pasta. It's instead get rid of your copy pasta and link to not this doc, the other tab. Anyway.
I think it's better to like reference canonical good examples like auth and the update to node, like I mentioned earlier, as the reference examples that people should be copying, because they will reference the template and, not do the overburdensome copy paste that happened before.
So, I mean, for what it's worth, Tim, I mean, like even auth, which you're using as a good example, it doesn't have a scope defined in its charter.
All right, so I think what needs to happen is one of us needs to create some template language that we paste into the 10 open issues. So essentially, hey, thanks for all your work on this. Really what we're trying to get at is just for you to define your scope and what's in and out of scope. And the best way to do that is to copy this new template and take it from there and do it in a soft, nice way. But I think we're all kind of circling around the same thing, is we want them to define scope, and a lot of them haven't, and they're focusing on non-important things.
Yeah, so I'll go and update the node charter to reference the template as we agree and here as a group best sees fit. And node already has a scope and out of scope section. We can then link to that and then say, please follow this pattern, right? But otherwise, I don't see, the PR is open, so that's why you're not going to see it.
Okay.
Well, I just have to go and update my PR to link to the template, and then I think we would have a decent example of what we were looking for.
Just a quick observation. We have 3 topics on the agenda, and we're 45 minutes in, and we're on the first topic. Should we move on to the second and third ones before we run out of time?
Second and third. We're going to get there. So I was about to close us out here. Brandon, do you want to take that action item?
Sure, I can do that.
Thank you.
I sent an email out to the SIG leads group on basically saying that exact same thing before we decided it. Sorry, which was out of scope section. Check out the SIG charter template. So just like an FYI, there's already an email that went out. If we want to send another one, that's fine. But then if you want to put it in the pull request, that's cool. And if you need help, let me know.
Okay, yeah. Sounds like you and Brandon should work together, Michelle. Okay. So we're in agreement. We're going to come back next meeting with all 10 of these hopefully merged.
Yeah, we do need people to I think volunteer for a couple of these. SIG VMware has nothing.
I can volunteer for SIG multi-cluster.
What do we do about Tim's spots? Brennan, I'd asked if you wouldn't mind taking those, but I mean, I can see that there's several of them, three of them. So
I took them. I took them all.
Oh, okay. I was happy to take some of them too, since yeah.
Yeah. Aaron and I definitely, I think, have the majority right now.
If you want to throw some my way, I'm happy to help.
Well, you're in tie with Aaron, so you're not a good person either.
Some other people volunteer.
Well, by talking about it in the context of next steering committee meeting, that gives us next week, at which point I plan on throwing up my hands and saying, I can't do this, or I need help if I need help by then.
Okay.
Or I'll just volunteer people like I did in the steering
Thank you.
channel.
That sounds great. Okay, I think, yeah, I agree. We should move on. So the next item in the board is document how working groups should be formed, which I think was the working group formation process proposal, work in progress doc that Jace drafted. Where are we on this?
I don't know. There was a whole there was a working group. It was a working group. It's my people.
I missed the drama, but I heard there was drama.
Yeah, nodeless working group. Nodeless? Not nodeless. Nodeless, yeah, nodeless. What's up? What's going on?
With working group formation or?
Yeah, toothless.
And so we have like a dozen working groups now. There wasn't a documented process at all. I think there was zero language about how to go about it. So people were kind of cargo culting with the approach, and it wasn't clear who could approve them or who could say no. And pretty much all of them just went ahead and got merged. Many of them actually don't even make sense as working groups. They should just be sub-projects. In any case, I think somewhere it says that you should ask SIGs that are interested, and that was interpreted as you need a SIG sponsor or something, but it's totally unclear. And people are asking, should this be a working group? How do I do that? Should it be a SIG? Well, everybody says no to new SIG, so I'll just make it a working group. So there seems to be a lot of confusion and frustration about about this. So Jace did draft something. There was also the whole discussion about birds of a feather, since I see that highlighted in terms of discussion groups. You know, some groups just got shouted down when they were trying to form and things like that. And I don't think that went anywhere. I discussed it with CNCF. CNCF is actually also having a similar discussion about what should the purpose of working groups be. Should they live forever? Should they also serve the function as birds of a feather kind of discussion groups or not? So Matt Farina is involved with that. There's a working group to sort that out in CNCF. There's actually a PR to add language, but it's not going anywhere at the moment. Because this, again, the working groups there are sort of like SIGs in Kubernetes, and that they're trying to define scope and things like that. So anyway, I assume that our working groups, somewhere I had some things I would expect from a short list of a few things I would expect from working groups to deliver. I don't remember if that made it into the proposal or not. You know, I think is it a working group if part is kind of the clearest part, or at least the first bullet of that. It does not own code, and it doesn't really have authority over anything. It's just to try to move some goal forward that crosses SIG boundaries.
So like, what do we need to move this forward? I'm thinking again of your unavailability and wondering if it's something that I can help push forward. And if I do that, what are next steps?
How does this, I guess, trying to map Jace's talk, which I have not yet fully read yet, and I apologize, but previously a working group had to be sponsored by, in theory, more than one SIG? Like it had to span a SIG?
Well, so that was unclear. And we had said that one purpose was for issues that span SIGs, but it wasn't clear that it actually officially needed sponsorship for multiple SIGs. So that was just like all the language around that is totally ambiguous and unclear.
Okay.
So this was trying to clarify things and get agreement. And obviously it goes into a fair amount of detail. It's been a while since I read it. But yeah, I mean, to move it forward, Joe had a pending PR open for various governance issues or something for a long time, and that said a couple of things about working groups, but it didn't, go into this much detail, obviously.
I mean, I'm happy to. Somebody asked me to resurrect that and merge it. I mean, like that kind of stalled out because I just felt like it was getting nitpicked, and so I feel like we need to find a way to make progress on this type of stuff without just nitpicking everything to death. It took like weeks to make some small changes.
So with this specific thing, if someone else from the steering committee, if you did it, Aaron, that would be great, took a look at this proposal and identified issues and sort of created a TLDR for the rest of the steering committee and sent that around, then we could say, yeah, that sounds good, and we could convert this to a PR and get it merged.
Okay, I will try and do that. This is the sort of thing I want to get done through the mailing list and have it like off the table by next meeting, because I'm hoping that at least settles roughly what the working group aspires to be and the creation procedure for it, much like we have for SIGs and the SIG creation procedure. And then I think the next thing that we can discuss at the next steering committee is what do we do with all of the existing working groups.
So
one thing I was curious is if by definition every working group has a SIG stakeholder, or can a working group exist that is only related to steering?
Could we potentially just assign a couple of people who are interested in this topic to take it forwards to get the PR in place instead of brainstorming here?
Who else wants to work on it with me? I see a hand up from Michelle. I see a hand up from Joe.
Yeah, I just want, because I want to get that other PR in, I'll help you do that, and I'll help review stuff just because I still have that hanging over me.
Okay, and Derek, I saw your hand too. Was that a quick yank the hand away? There were too many people, or you want?
No, I'll participate.
Okay, cool.
Can I have a minute at the end of the call to discuss the Code of Conduct Committee? I didn't see a card for that on the issue board. That's why I'm bringing it up.
I do not, and as far as license scanning goes, there's nothing concrete I can say or do about that right now. My gut tells me there were a whole bunch of relevant issues that were thrown at us, and somebody who is currently on the release team has volunteered to help out with that. Contributor experience has volunteered to help out with that. I do not trust that that's going to actually fly. I wonder about finding the right owners and staffing it appropriately if this is an urgent thing.
How is this steering's problem though? This seems like SIG release's issue.
It's
not SIG. I mean, it's the source code itself. We have dependencies on licenses that are not valid licenses. It's not really.
Totally get that, but we're a policy board, right? We're not necessarily. We should say that we depend on XYZ licenses, which is totally
right. So it came through us because it came from CNCF, right? And
we are dependencies that are in violation of policy. What is our policy for like fixing it?
Yes,
that's punted to SIG release.
Okay, so why is that? I'm just raising the concern that I don't know if that will happen fast enough, and are we okay with that?
Well, it's been lingering for months and months and months, so I don't know how super urgent it is.
Okay, that's fine. That's all we need to say about it.
I also don't know that SIG release is an obvious place for it.
What would be the alternative?
Well, so the person who is trying to write something originally was involved with SIG testing and SIG contributor experience. I mean, effectively, it's like the issue of what system do we use to vendor dependencies and things like that, right? We need to have tests of that any new dependency that gets added actually meets the licensing requirements.
Yeah, but it's also like the dependencies themselves, replacing them with something else that's suitable. I don't think we're going to get benefit by talking more about this today. I want to give code of conduct discussion some time, if that's cool with everybody.
Yes.
Okay. All right, Michelle, it's yours. We're still on camera.
We can still be on. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Yeah, so I published, or I opened a pull request containing a document which contains basically what I had given to everyone as an outline of how we would form the Code of Conduct Committee. And kind of what the bootstrapping process is and how would they kick off and what their objectives are. So that's in a pull request. I can send you all a link to that for review. The vote is out. So I think we're 7 or 8 people who were nominated. I think it was 7 unique people who were nominated. So you should have all gotten a link to vote on who you think should be on the Code of Conduct Committee. So that's out. Let's see what else is there. I don't remember when I said the deadline was to vote. I think it was tomorrow, but I can extend it if anybody needs more time. Does anybody feel like they need more time? Did anyone not get that link or not know what I'm talking about?
I probably got it, but I'll have to figure out how to find it.
Okay, if y'all could take a few minutes today or tomorrow and try to find it and do that and let me know if that's an issue, then that'd be really great. So we can close that loop. After that, we'd form the committee and have the first meeting. I will say after reviewing Paris and Jace's research on Code of Conduct addendums and the thing that Mozilla does, that I feel that the outline that I created was pretty weak. So there's just a lot of work to do there, and there's a lot of wiggle room, and there should be a lot of iteration coming forward on how that stuff goes. So that's all I have. Does anybody have anything specific they want to discuss or any questions or suggestions?
Just thanks very much for pulling that all together, Michelle. Super useful. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Go vote.
Go vote.
Do I get a sticker for voting?
So it was the CIVS poll?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and you know what stinks about that is that I had some people come forward that wanted to be on the Code of Conduct Committee after I published that, so I didn't know how to deal with that issue. There's more candidates, and I also feel like one company shouldn't have the majority of the seats on that committee. So, not more than 2 people from one company. But I didn't add that to the outline because I hadn't discussed that with y'all. So I do want to add that little line. If anybody has any issues with it, feel free to comment on the pull request that comes forward. I'll send an email out with it.
Sounds great.
Michelle, did I miss? I got the link on the poll, but I don't remember seeing like the write-up for the nominees. Is that?
Okay, so there should be an email. That's a great question. There should be an email in Steering Private. It has a link to a spreadsheet which has all the candidates and basically the description from the nomination form on why they should be selected. That should give you more information about each candidate. And if you need more, please let me know and I can do more research or give you whatever you need. It's my first time doing this kind of thing.
Cool. Yeah, I'll echo the thanks for pushing forward on this sorely needed Code of Conduct committee work.
Pleasure.
Can I make a very brief comment before we wrap up? Just wanted to remind everybody, I think we got the steering committee elections coming up, and I don't think we have allocated anyone to make sure they actually happen. Do you want Tim and I did that exercise on who gets to vote. Should we just extend that and actually execute the vote, or do we have better ideas?
Can you make an issue for that? Put it on our board and assign.
Yeah, sorry, I put it in the notes.
Okay.
Didn't know about issues. I can do that. The reason I'm expediting is because I don't think we have like 2 weeks to start thinking about it. The election results need to be announced at the beginning of October, essentially. And if you wind it back to, getting candidates and all that
Sure,
stuff,
I understand that.
Week.
We really had the help of George and Paris from Contributor Experience on running this last time. They're both kind of out of pocket this week, and I don't know how much Next is going to eat up their time next week. But we definitely ought to start thinking about it.
Okay, unless anybody has objections, I'll speak to Tim Sinclair and we'll figure something out next week.
Okay, cool. And that is our hour. Thank you, everybody. So great to see you all again. Happy Wednesday.
Thanks, Aaron.
Bye, thank you.